under attack on all sides. Just because you don't believe in conspiracy theories don't mean they ain't after you. But in reality, sometimes stuff happens with the signal from the studio to the tower, which sends our programming to your car, home, office, or your transistor radio. But when you download the KBLA 1580 app, the sound is clear as a bell. All day, all night, anywhere in the world. From Los Angeles to Lagos. So, we love all of our listeners, no matter how you hear us. But when you download the KBLA 1580 app and hear that richness, you'll wonder why you didn't do it sooner. But don't take my word for it. Download the KBLA 1580 app right now. I'm Tavis Smiley, and I approve this message.
Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Yeah.
4 minutes past the hour in the home stretch of the Tavis Smiley program for Monday, September, whatever it is. My birthday's coming up this Sunday, so I've kind of lost track of the actual days of the week. Actually, it's the 16th. My very special guest, and it's a pleasure to welcome to our microphones. He is a journalist, and I mentioned earlier, he's also a troublemaker. He's the founder of the Institute for Public Accuracy, and he's written a new book, War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. A pleasure to welcome to our microphones Mr. Norman Solomon. How are you, sir?
I'm hanging in here. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you so much for being with us. Let me ask you right off the top, and we're going to play a little bit of the back and forth during last week's debate about Israel-Gaza, but I want to start out by asking you, in terms of the work that you've done, how is the nexus between warfare and finance played out? In other words, who profits from war?
It is very lucrative for a small number of people, and I don't call them defense contractors. I call them military contractors. They make a killing, literally and figuratively. And as the song said a couple of minutes ago, what is it good for? War is good for a few people who get rich and richer. For the rest of the people, it's a whole other story.
Now, can politicians, in your judgment, actually stop war and dismantle America's war machine?
If they had the fortitude, if they had the courage.
You're talking about politicians here.
Yeah, really.
Sorry.
Not a lot of that around. Yes, it is a rare commodity. It has been done and has been spoken out for. You know, I think about, for instance, the Congressional Black Caucus when I was growing up. And in the 1970s, there were some powerhouses. Shirley Chisholm, John Conyers, later on, a little bit later, Ron Dellums.
Ron Dellums, I knew you were going to say him because he was an extraordinary man.
Mostly Black leaders in Congress as a whole in the last years of the Vietnam War said, enough is too much already. We want this to end. There have been periodic people of all races and backgrounds in the House and Senate speaking out, but it's getting pretty thin there, Mark. It's really hard to hear. And often the problem is the military-industrial complex, the contributions that come in massively from the military contractors, and party loyalty. And we've seen how party loyalty, as John Kennedy said long ago, sometimes it asks too much. It can be a soul snatcher.
Important point. Now, when you talk about the human toll and the fact that it's invisible to most Americans, what factors play into that invisibility?
A lot of it is the mixture of media and politics, where we're encouraged to believe that if we watch TV, listen to the radio, see what's happening in the mass media, therefore we know what war is about. We think, for instance, that we know what's happening in Gaza right now. And that is unfortunately self-delusionary for two reasons. One is the limitation of the technology and journalism itself. I mean, you'd have to be a great poet and more to really convey to people with words or images what it's like to be in a war zone. And yet there's sort of a conceit that, oh, I watch CNN or MSNBC, and therefore I know what's going on in Gaza. Not at a gut level, not in personal terms, not in the humanity matter of the matter, which after all, suffering and war. Suffering is war. War is suffering. That's what it's all about. We have an added factor, which is media bias. And I get into this in the book. It's a dynamic of how war is invisible to us here in the United States, especially certain wars. And let's just compare. Ukraine, we get a lot of good coverage. I'll set aside the political bias. They don't talk about NATO. They just talk about how bad Russia is, which is a good point to make. Terrible invasion. Don't talk about what NATO has done to provoke it all. But there is really, that aside, a lot of consistent, true coverage about the suffering of the war in Ukraine. What happens to people, these heartbreaking stories that we get. But in Gaza, it's a different story. It's very occasional. We don't get that kind of empathy, that human characteristic. And part of it is, frankly, racial bias. And it is political bias, because Israel is an ally of the US government. Russia is an enemy of the US government. So we're told. So therefore, it depends on who's killing and who's being killed.
Important point. Now, I have to tell you a very quick story, and I want to share this with the audience. Many years ago, I was, and I still don't know to this day why, but I was invited to a White House garden party in the middle of the summer, beautiful day, out in the back of the White House. And, there were a lot of reporters there, a lot of different folks, a lot of politicians, good number of lobbyists, as a matter of fact. And while I was walking around, and I didn't know that many people there, but suddenly it hit me like a ton of bricks. All of these people depend on each other. The lobbyists depend on the media depends on access to the politicians depend on money that lobbyists generate. It's a kind of like huge circle. And I realized that if the American people, and I'm not talking about the people inside the Beltway now, the American people knew how that system worked and how you could donate money to a politician and get your phone calls returned, I think there might be a great deal of upset. And I say that in the context of the kinds of coverage that we get. People don't know there are a couple of wars going on in Africa that you absolutely never hear about. Certainly, I don't hear about them here in the UK. And my guess is you don't hear about them in America either.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. And it's really about the closed circle. As you say, it's a largely closed circle between the elite media and the in power politicians. And there is a well understood dynamic where if, let's say, you're working for a major or medium-sized network and you snag an interview with a powerful senator or the president or the vice president, if you ask questions that are too tough, that go cut to the bone, you can forget being invited again. Now, I'm not talking about the tactical questions and the kind of things that you'll hear asked routinely by the major networks of the top politicians. They're used to it. They parry and thrust. They're used to it.
You're talking about tough questions.
Yeah, we're talking, if we talk about really tough questions like, wow, you got several $100,000 from military contractors in the last election cycle. Did that have anything to do with your enthusiasm for shipping weapons to Ukraine without any limit? For instance.
Now, hold that thought, Norman.
Yeah.
Hold that thought, because we have to take a break. But I want to come back and expand on that particular situation. Because, again, I think if most Americans knew exactly how this system works, maybe they wouldn't allow it to be invisible. Our guest is Norman Solomon. He is the author of the book, War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. Forward in a minute.
From California to the Carolinas, everybody's listening to Tavis. More when we come forward. Tavis Smiley's new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 Years Later, is now on sale everywhere. This classic text shot to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list almost 2 decades ago. If you have the original book, you will surely want to get this 20th anniversary edition with powerful new contributions from today's leading voices. This 20th anniversary edition presents a compelling blend of historical insights and contemporary urgency in this critical and unprecedented election year. Get your copy of The Covenant with Black America, 20 Years Later, today.
Make a move into a home of your own. With City National Bank's Ladder Up Home Loan Grant, you could receive up to $20,000 that you never need to pay back. Use it toward your down payment, save on closing costs, or to buy down your mortgage rate. Find out more at cnb.com/ladderuphome. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Property must be in a qualifying market in California, New York, or New Jersey. Additional terms and conditions apply. Not all applicants will qualify. Terms are subject to change without notice. City National Bank is an equal housing lender. Member FDIC. NMLS number 536994.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event. Or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
Let's bring the nail gun over here.
Jose stands tall atop his sustainable flooring company.
Totally. It's renewable and moisture resistant, but we have several green options too. Or we got some beautiful reclaimed oak.
But floored by his success, he needs to hire more installers.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Put our matching platform to work so you can spend less time searching and more time connecting with talented candidates. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Girl, I have a secret. When I get stressed out, I get sweaty. That's why I use Secret Clinical Antiperspirant. It's like my own secret weapon. For 72 hours, I get Secret's strongest protection against sweat caused by stress, heat, and activity, because you know how crazy life can get. Plus, it's made with advanced odor fighters that don't just cover up smelliness. They help prevent it from happening in the first place. Believe me, if I weren't wearing Secret, I'd be a hot, smelly mess. Thankfully, Secret works.
Made fresh daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
We are back. This is the Tavis Smiley program. My name is Mark Riley, and it's a pleasure to have with us Mr. Norman Solomon. He's the author of the new book, War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. Now, before we go any further, I do want to ask you about something that I've seen happen, because I've been around for a minute just like you have. And I've seen people who do what you do and say what you say end up being branded as somehow outliers. I won't say troublemakers, they reserve that for me, but outliers, people who have some axe to grind, and therefore what you say should not be viewed as credible. How do you fight back against that?
Well, we have to be true to ourselves. And I remember that the great populist Jim Hightower used to say, in the washing machine, it's the agitator that gets the dirt out. And we've been accused, and by we, I mean those even who came before us, before we were born. We were accused of being outside agitators, yes, troublemakers, all the rest of the 9 yards. And the vilification, and we know this from history that we can be proud of, vilification, it comes with the territory. And so we need to keep on keeping on and get our inspiration from where it really is situated, which is in our history. And it's a cliche, but it is often true. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We're not just these atomized individuals doing our thing. We're part of the history of social change, and really everything in the United States that we can be proud of came from the bottom up. It was never handed down as a gift from those in power.
Important point. Now, it dawns on me looking at the title of your book, and I think this is important for people to realize. It's called War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. How, Norman Solomon, do you make the invisible visible?
We really insist that human rights is indivisible, that we don't differentiate between our brothers and sisters on this planet, and we don't buy into it even tacitly. The idea that some lives matter and some lives don't. I have a comment in the book that given the way that media and politics usually portrays U.S. wars and other wars overseas, it's a tacit communication that some lives matter and some lives don't. Two tiers of grief, two levels where grief is considered to be of significance. And once we cross that Rubicon, once we descend into that dehumanization, then all kinds of atrocities are possible because it's a sort of a tossed off assumption that, well, that's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes, versus this is horrific. It has to be stopped. And as we speak, we're in the 12th month of what many analysts justifiably call a genocide in Gaza. And yet we have a toleration of that from members of Congress and indeed the president. And so we have Congress voting massive amounts of weapons that make possible the continued mass murder, mostly of children and women, Palestinian people in Gaza. And just the last couple of weeks, the president has green-lighted $20 billion with a B dollars worth of more weapons to Israel. And as I say in the book, without the weapons flow in the pipeline from the United States, the killing just could not go on in Gaza.
Now, you wrote a piece recently for Salon.com called Undebatable: What Harris and Trump Left Unsaid Indicts Us All. And I want to play a small snatch of their discussion about the Israel-Gaza conflict. I think we have it coming up.
To the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters, because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
Well, there you have it from Kamala Harris. What's wrong with what she said, Norman Solomon?
Well, a lot's wrong with it. And I should preface my comment here by saying that clearly Kamala Harris is a much better potential president than Donald Trump. And I certainly hope that our next president is Harris rather than Trump. That said, we have to be truthful. There is a claim made in this statement that implicitly conveys that the United States is an innocent bystander trying to bring about, as she says, an immediate ceasefire. And yet the reality is the only way a ceasefire could possibly happen, given the mentality of the Netanyahu government in Israel, is if the United States cuts off weapons. It's now almost 12 full months where the U.S. has been sending those weapons while the slaughter is happening in Gaza. And I, frankly, I'm really tired of hearing from some quarters that when we call for a ceasefire and a cutoff of weapons to Israel to make the ceasefire possible, that somehow then we are anti-Semitic. I'm one of many American Jews who insists that human rights should belong to everyone. And so, long story short, a carefully crafted response to that question from Kamala Harris really evaded the reality that Israel is not defending itself. It is creating carnage on an hourly, daily basis, and it could not continue without the United States supplying the wherewithal to make it happen. Also, she could have mentioned, but obviously did not, that Israel is an apartheid state. And the United States has a bad history in the past of supporting a apartheid state in South Africa. We finally got our leaders to wise up, but today our tax dollars are still supporting the Israeli apartheid state.
Let me ask you this. Is there a difference in your mind between sending weapons to Israel and funding Israel so they can get weapons?
A lot of it is the same because the money goes to Israel, then they buy the weapons from the United States. And so a lot of the shipments are now technically called sales, but it's just going from the US taxpayers into a pocket in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and then it just cycles on back to enrich a few people. And meanwhile, we are getting a tremendous disparity, as I get into in the book, between how the killing is taking place and what that human reality is in Gaza compared to the tragic, terrible attack on October 7th that killed 1,200 people in Israel. It's a different coverage. It's a very biased coverage, and it dehumanizes people in Gaza as a result.
Now, I'm over here in the UK. There was a move afoot, and I think it actually happened, to defund certain weapon sales to Israel. The blowback here was tremendous, and the politicians that implemented it are still feeling that blowback. Doesn't a politician or doesn't a group of politicians in the States who advocate the same thing face the same blowback?
Absolutely. It's a matter of courage. It's a matter of sticking with convictions, with basic human decency. And so, like, what is this all about? Is it about them advancing their careers, keeping their head down, or is it about doing something decent for human beings?
Important point. Now, I got to ask you this, and I don't mean in any way, shape, or form to denigrate the American public, but I get a sense every now and then that people in the United States don't care if America funds Israel, don't care who wins that battle between Israel and the Palestinians. It's just something that they don't see as impacting their own daily lives, that is, and therefore, the heck with it. Let whatever's going to happen, happen. Am I wrong?
It's a complex question that I think you would be correct characterizing it that way 2 or 3 years ago. And yet in the last year, there's been quite a shift. Generally, the US public overall has been responsive to the messaging they get from the White House, from most in Congress, from the mass media. But the carnage, the slaughter, the cruelty from the air and on the ground done by this so-called Israeli Defense Force inflicted on, as I said, mostly children and women. It's been so horrific that even with the media spin, a lot of that has come through. And the polling that's been done in the last few months shows that actually now a strong majority of the American people want a cutoff, want an arms embargo from the United States to Israel. And it's a tremendous gap between most people in the United States and the U.S. Congress on that issue.
It is the Congress. The Congress is actually the ones that are behind continuing the arms sales to Israel.
Absolutely. There's been an unprecedented 10-year deal that locked in $3.8 billion each year for the full 10 years. We're about 7 years into it for Israel to get military. That's just for starters. And then ever since October, the U.S. has been piling billions of dollars worth of weapons, as I mentioned, just green-lighted from the White House, $20 billion more. And that includes 2,000-pound bombs. I mean, that only actual impact in an urban environment, which is largely what the battlefield is in Gaza, is to kill civilians. And yet somehow the powers that be on Capitol Hill and the White House, they're cool with that. Well, that's absolutely sickening. And it's partly prompted by the kind of media coverage that we get. You know, one quick point here, studies were done, for instance, the first 6 weeks after October 7th, the horrible massacre in Israel, then the slaughter began in Gaza from the Israeli military. Here's a ratio of the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, and Washington Post. Applying the word slaughter, for every time that was used to describe what was done to Palestinian people, 60 times was the same word used to describe the people in Israel who were killed by Hamas. So it's a very uneven, it's conveying that we think that the Israelis are really important people whose lives really matter. And when it comes to Palestinians, well, it's
not so much.
Too bad. Not so much.
We have to take a break. Norman Solomon is our guest. The name of his book, and it's a really important one, War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. Back shortly.
This is getting good.
Yeah, man.
Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
Paid for by government.com. Did you know the United States Mint has issued a new Morgan silver dollar coin in proof condition for the first time? Not only that, they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 400,000 of these legal tender silver dollars were issued. These first ever Morgan silver dollars are brand new with stunning mirror-like finish, minted by the iconic San Francisco Mint. Call now and you're guaranteed a new first ever 99.9% pure silver proof Morgan dollar. To learn more, call 1-800-973-9717. If you order now, you will receive a free coin collector bonus pack, a $25 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-973-9717 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. That's 1-800-973-9717.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The Carolinas are preparing for possible floods, heavy winds, and tornadoes as a potential tropical storm is set to make landfall. The National Hurricane Center says the storm will hit South Carolina this afternoon and then move inland over both states overnight. One of the Colorado paramedics convicted in the death of African-American Elijah McClain has been ordered released from prison. Peter Chikuniak was sentenced to 5 years in prison earlier this year after he was found guilty of criminally negligent homicide. The first-grade Sandy Hook survivors will vote in their first presidential election. The teens met with and told their descriptions of the Sandy Hook shootings to Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House on National Gun Violence Awareness Day on June 6th before their high school graduation. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Hey, Amazon
Amazon Prime members. Why pay more for groceries? Shop Prime exclusive deals at your local Amazon Fresh grocery store and get savings on thousands of grocery items. Save up to 50% on weekly grocery favorites and 10% on Amazon brands. Find an Amazon Fresh store near you. Select varieties.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Chargers are one of 9 NFL teams to start the season 2-0. They won by 23 in Carolina. For the second straight week, the Chargers had more rushing yards than passing yards, 219 to 130. Running back J.K. Dobbins had 131 yards and a touchdown. Dobbins has 266 yards rushing in the Chargers' first 2 games. The Chargers are at undefeated Pittsburgh next Sunday. The Rams are 0-2 after losing by 31 at Arizona. The Rams defense gave up 489 yards in total offense. The Rams play their home opener next Sunday against San Francisco. All 6 of the NFL's black head coaches are in the win column. Tampa Bay's Todd Bowles and the Las Vegas Raiders' Antonio Pierce got their first win of the season Sunday. Both wins came on the road. Tampa Bay at Detroit and the Raiders in Baltimore. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the story of the one. As a facility technician installing a new welding station, he knows getting the ventilation right is critical for safety. That's why when questions arise, there's Grainger. Grainger offers detailed technical product information online at his fingertips, so it's easy to find what he needs. Because when it comes to safety, having answers means he and his people can breathe a little easier. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Oh no, stomach issues again?
Stomach issues?
Who are you?
Your pancreas. I could be the real reason for your diarrhea, gas, bloating, stomach pain, or loose oily stools.
I thought it was my stomach.
People often do, but any of these symptoms could mean having a condition called exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI. With EPI, the pancreas doesn't release enough enzymes to break down food, but EPI is manageable. Use the symptom checker on identifyepi.com and speak with your doctor. That's identifyepi.com. Sponsored by AbbVie.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
Well, at least my name rhymes with Smiley. My name is Riley, Mark Riley. Glad to be with you. And our very special guest, Mr. Norman Solomon, author of the new book, War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. Norman, I want to talk about Gaza a little bit more, because what we've seen in the States, and it's been taking place to a lesser extent in other places. In fact, this past weekend in my town, the town I live in now, Brighton, there was a pretty sizable demonstration trying to call for a ceasefire and further disarming of Israel and further defunding of Israel by the United Kingdom. Now, a lot of this in America has taken place on college campuses, and yet both students, faculty, and in some cases administration have paid the price for that. How do you see that? How do you stop that?
Really, a lot of prices have been paid in positive and negative ways. when the campuses erupted early this year and spring became a lot of upheaval at a lot of small colleges to large universities, people in power in Washington, and especially the demagogic chairs and members of the Republican majority in the House, they just went to town. And they have a political and sometimes theological reason to back Israel in the hilt, to the hilt. Like Israel can't do anything wrong. Whatever Israel does is A-OK. And so they just went to town. They hauled in some college professors. It's sort of like a show trial, college presidents. Why didn't you crack down on these protesting students? They forced either bending the knee in supplication or occasional a stiff spine. But either way, these college presidents really were pressured. And what we've seen, Mark, in the last few weeks is the fruition of a summer in which college administrators across the country have gathered their forces. They've hired their consultants and firms that advise about how to deal with crisis management on campus. And so a lot of rules are being imposed by college administrations to try to clamp down on students. And it's sort of a double talk we're getting a lot in the news media from college presidents now. Oh, I believe in free speech. The right to protest is really good, but we are going to make sure that it's not disruptive. Well, pardon me, protest is disruptive.
By its nature.
Part of what hopefully it will be, because we're trying to nonviolently disrupt the status quo and the complacency. And one thing among others that really gets me is this line that we've heard all year, that some students on campus are made uncomfortable by the discussion of Israel's activity in Gaza. I am not aware that if you go to a college, you have a guarantee to never feel uncomfortable. Part of learning is to find out about history in real time and the past, and maybe it makes you uncomfortable. That's how you learn.
When we talk about Gaza, and I'm not even sure most people understand, Gaza, from what I've been told, is 25 miles long and 5 miles wide? Is that relatively
It is really
accurate?
small. It might even be small. It's amazingly small enclave.
And they've squeezed all of these folks in there. And I think, and this doesn't get discussed at all, I don't think, or if it does, not much. And that's the impact of the settlers movement on Gaza. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, Gaza has been called, I think quite rightly, by Noam Chomsky, the analyst, and others, the biggest open-air prison in the world. And that has been the case for decades. Israel controlling the ingress, egress, what goes in, what comes out, what is allowed, what goes on there. Essentially, it's an occupation through surrounding, even if troops per se have withdrawn, periodic bombing raids and so forth. And so the net effect is it's even in the best of times, it's purgatory, if not hellish. And the settler movement in particular over in the West Bank has been vicious. It's really geared up. I mean, this is an illegal occupation by Israel. And yet in the West Bank, the settlers are moving in now overtly allied with the Netanyahu government. And they're taking land, they're demolishing houses, they're terrorizing and killing. As a matter of fact, I've seen quotes from Israelis and some American supporters in the West Bank. They say now this is a worse situation than dealing with the Klan during the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in the South, because at least when people were dealing with the Klan, you didn't know for sure that the police were going to be aligned. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Now, there's no way when young people, others, elderly are terrorized by armed settlers, sometimes murdered and maimed, there's no one to call. If you call the government, that's silly because they're part of the terrorism.
Incredible. Now, I wonder, and I'm sure your book deals with this, how much opposition is there to the Netanyahu government inside Israel?
There's a lot, especially for two reasons. Before the tragedy of October 7th, his power grab was so extreme. He was going to destroy the power of the courts because he wanted to run the government by himself. And there were historically large protests in Tel Aviv and elsewhere of Israelis demanding that Netanyahu either resign or cease and desist forever his effort to crush the court system. After October 7th, there was a big flip because, of course, people were traumatized. They knew people in a country of just several million. They knew people who had been terribly murdered by Hamas, and a kind of a trauma set in, and really, frankly, a kind of callousness towards Palestinians. And yet, even now, Netanyahu is facing increasing opposition and large protests because he's willing to sacrifice the lives of now 100 or so remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza because he's got his own agenda. His agenda is to remain as prime minister. He is, and this will sound familiar, a demagogue who's been indicted for corruption. And he knows that if he leaves office, he's probably going to prison. So he doesn't want to leave office. And he knows that if the war ends, he no longer will be prime minister.
Incredible. Now, we have to take a break, but I wanted to talk about something that I've heard from several different people who I respect. And that's the question of whether or not Netanyahu, before October 7th, was willing to look the other way while Qatar, in particular, funded Hamas. And the rationale was because neither Netanyahu nor Hamas wants to see a two-state solution to the Palestinian problem. We'll get back to that very, very shortly. Our guest, Norman Solomon, and he's such a knowledgeable person. I'm so glad he is with us today. He is the author of War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. And American foreign policy, I'm not always sure that American foreign policy is completely understood by the people who craft it, if you want to call it craft. But we'll get back to that very shortly. This is the Tavis Smiley program. My name is Mark Riley. I should say forward in a flash.
Generous listening. Charitable listening. It's why everybody wants to talk to Tavis. The conversation continues when we come forward.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month.
If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your Senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
Mom, meet Sarah.
From first-time Nana moments.
Yeah, welcome to Flight 101.
To annual girls trip moments. Your can't-miss moments are worth protecting against RSV. If you're 75 or older or 60 plus with a chronic condition like asthma, COPD, heart disease, or severe diabetes, you're at higher risk of landing in the hospital from RSV. And there are no prescription RSV treatments. Check eligibility and schedule your RSV vaccine at vaxassist.com.
So where should we go next?
Sponsored by Pfizer.
You might wonder, John Legend, how do you keep your voice sounding so legendary? Honey. And how do I keep my protection against COVID-19 up to date? With a COVID shot this season, designed for recent variants.
You can get your COVID-19 shot when getting your flu shot if you're due for both, as recommended by the CDC.
The fresher, the better.
Ask your healthcare provider about getting this season's COVID-19 shot when getting your flu shot.
Sponsored by Pfizer.
Hey, John, why so glum?
I just got let go.
The company's downsizing. This is the third time in the last 2 years. I'm done with this.
Have you thought about My Computer Career? I've heard they can train you for a career in IT in just a few months, including cybersecurity and the basics of AI. And you don't need prior training or experience. Now that's a recession-resistant career.
Wow, thanks. I'll check them out.
Go to mycomputercareer.edu and take the free career evaluation. mycomputercareer.edu. Financial aid is available for qualified students, including the GI Bill.
I spray and scrub, but the soap scum in my bathtub is still there.
I spray and scrub, but the burnt sauce on my stovetop sticks around.
Sprays can leave grime behind, but new Mr. Clean Ultra Foamy Magic Eraser combines the scrubbing power of an eraser with the cleaning power of Dawn to melt away tough messes on contact.
Just wet, squeeze, and erase.
Stop spraying, start erasing, and clean with more magic than ever with new Ultra Foamy Magic Eraser.
Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean.
Sometimes he fails at fitting in,
but we're okay with that.
You're inside the Tavis Smiley Show.
Yeah, I don't fit in. I've never fit in. What can I tell you? This is the Tavis Smiley Show. My name is Mark Riley. We're in the home stretch of the program with our guest, Mr. Norman Solomon. Norman, is this a fairy tale about Netanyahu looking the other way while Qatar funded Hamas because they were both operating with the same purpose? I'm talking, of course, before October 7th, that neither one of them wanted a two-state solution to the Palestinian problem?
It's very accurate that while for a while Netanyahu would sort of give semi-lip service to his two-state solution, now he doesn't even bother. He never really wanted it whatsoever. And in terms of funding of Hamas, that's also very true. When you go back a couple of decades, the avowed enemy of the Israeli leaders was the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, and they were basically secular. They didn't talk about fundamentalist Muslim precepts and so forth. They were not only secular, but they had some very left tendencies. And so the philosophy and strategy of Netanyahu and his cabal was, well, hey, we've got to screw that up. So let's fund these religious, the more extreme, the better, religious fanatics. Let's build up, let's give money to Hamas. They will invoke the Islamic precepts and twist them around to justify killing civilians, but they will edge Yasser Arafat and the PLO out of the way. And that very much happened. The basic descendant of the PLO, the Palestine administrators in the West Bank, they're corrupt, Mr. Abbas and so forth, and they're sort of working with, although resentful of the Israeli occupiers. But over in Gaza, Hamas was elected, after help from the Israeli government, and they were elected, and then they didn't want another election. That's like 15 plus years ago. So it comes down to that. Split the enemy has been the philosophy of the Israeli government, and it's in the realm of watch out what you ask for, because Mark will remember all too well that during the 1980s, Ronald Reagan loved funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Wow, this is going to be very cool. We're going to drive the Russians out. And of course, the Mujahideen evolved into the Taliban, and also were very close with nobody else but the man responsible for running Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, very true. Osama bin Laden. Yep. Incredible. Now, I want to shift gears in the time we have left. I wonder what you think the future of progressive politics will be if Kamala Harris is elected president. I've never seen her as a particular progressive. I got family on the West Coast who just if you put Kamala Harris and progressive in the same sentence, they go crazy. But what do you think? And you were a delegate for Bernie Sanders during the DNC. Has his brand of progressive politics kind of faded into the sunset?
I think that Bernie's program has been somewhat absorbed by the mainstream Democratic Party, and meanwhile, he's lost a bit of clout. Kamala Harris, it's so much, what is it, a Les McCann song? Compared to what? I mean, compared to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, she is a brilliant progressive. Compared to what we need, she's not all that progressive. And I think there's really a split. And this, and I'm showing my age here because I grew up during the Vietnam War, she's the equivalent of a Cold War liberal, like Henry Jackson
I
and
remember
others.
that.
Yeah, and so you look at what part of the program is. When it comes to domestic policies, with some pushing, she won't be great, but with some pushing, she will get more funding to communities, repair the social safety net, fight against the attacks on civil liberties, support civil rights. All good, vast difference from the Republican Party. But when it comes to foreign policy, from all indications, she will be a continuation of the idea that 4% of the world, the people in the United States, should be in charge and work our will on the world as much as we can, including with weapons.
We have to take another break. We're almost out of time, but Norman Solomon is with us. Stay with us.
Why does Tavis say, when we come forward?
Because he's not going back.
And you don't have to go back either. Forward ever, backward never. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
You know where you want to go in life, and City National Bank can help. City National knows the dedication it takes to build your vision for the future into a reality, and our team is here for you. We have a wide range of options to help, from personal savings accounts to interest-bearing money market savings accounts and more, all designed to help you get where you want to go. City National, here for every stage of the journey. Learn more at cnb.com. City National Bank is a subsidiary of Royal Bank of Canada, member FDIC.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 believes in community empowerment. LA's 99 neighborhood councils form the grassroots level of the Los Angeles city government. The system was created to connect LA's diverse communities to City Hall. While neighborhood council board members are volunteers, they are also public officials elected to office by the members of their community. Neighborhood councils advocate on issues like homelessness, housing, land use, emergency preparedness, public safety, parks, transportation, and sustainability. They also provide local expertise on the delivery of city services to their various communities. Neighborhood councils are open to participation by anyone who is a part of the fabric of daily life in said community. This includes those who live, work, or own property or a business. If you are interested in stepping up to join your local neighborhood council, visit www.empowerla.org. That's empowerla.org. It's time to think globally, but act locally. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Freedom is an endless meeting. So let's get back to it with Tavis Smiley.
We've got just a little bit of time left with our guest, Norman Solomon, and the name of his very, very important book, War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. Norman, before we let you go, I have to ask you, and I know this is not particularly fair, but when a Black person runs for office, certainly when Barack Obama did, expectations in the black community went through the roof as to what he would do. Now, I interviewed Chuck D at the Denver Democratic Convention in 2008, and he said, whoa, hold everything. Don't expect that much from him. Is it wrong for the black community to expect, if Kamala Harris wins, and she hasn't won yet, but if she wins, does it make sense for black people to expect something from her?
The hopes are realistic and understandable, but we always have to organize from the bottom up because the problems are structural. We could have the most wonderful, clear-headed leader in the Oval Office, but if we don't organize, if we don't justifiably raise hell for social justice, there are going to be real limits to what can be accomplished.
You know, that's an important point. What can be accomplished is a function of the people who will put Kamala Harris, or for that matter, Donald Trump, in office, because he is still running, even though you might say he's sputtering. And it appears as though Kamala Harris, as you very correctly pointed out, might be good on domestic stuff, but not quite so much on foreign policy or international issues. And by the way, that was one thing that Donald Trump, I mean, even before the debate, went after her about, is that she's not schooled in foreign policy. She doesn't know that much about foreign policy. Is that an Achilles heel for her?
Well, I think it could be a blank slate that's positive, whereas Donald Trump knows a lot about foreign policy. It's just what he knows is wrong.
That's an important point. Norman Solomon, it's been a joy talking to you, and I hope to talk to you again in the future.
Oh, same here. Thanks, Mark. All
righty. Time for us to get out of here. And again, I will be back substituting for Tavis, who again is taking a well-earned, I emphasize well-earned time off. And we'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. Please, folks, get involved. Get ready to go out and exercise your franchise. And whatever you do, vote your interest. Not somebody else's interest, your interest. Y'all take care, all right?
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore here.